We think this is a mistake. We believe that Nova Scotians will be dismayed by this move on the government's part, and we too are dismayed on their behalf. This across-the-board tax increase that will increase the expenses of every household in Nova Scotia amounts to a tax grab on the part of the government of $28 million. $28 million out of the pockets of hardworking Nova Scotia families and into the coffers of the government. And in exchange, the government offers a program that the price of which they put at $10 million. Now, Mr. Speaker, it does not take a lot to see that that is not a fair exchange. If the government had taken the money out of one program and put it all into assistance for low-income families, we might be having a different debate today, Mr. Speaker. But really, this is about the government taking more money out of people's pockets. Every single household in Nova Scotia will pay more as a result of this government's budget. The program that they have implemented, the $10 million program, is very similar to the previous Keep the Heat program, which we know from experience did not work. Advocacy groups who advocate on behalf of those most in need, as well as this caucus, have begged the government, pleaded with the government to redesign the program so that it will actually work. But instead, the program has been reinstituted much the same as it was before. We do not question the need for this program. From the moment it was eliminated, we have asked that it be brought back. We did not ever see the rationale for chopping that program. So it is not the necessity of the program that we question, Mr. Speaker. It is the design. It will not get to many people who need the help. This is not just something that we are asserting. We know this from experience. And so even though the government has set aside $10 million, we have to see that as a maximum amount. And that is if 100% of the eligible families actually take up the program. And we know from bitter previous experience that the take-up rate will be much, much less than 100%. The amount of money the government will spend will be less than $10 million on this program. We know this from experience, Mr. Speaker. The only question is how much less than $10 million will it be? Will it be $3 million, $5 million, $7 million? We don't know. But we do know that any paper-based application program will defeat very many of the families that need the help the most. More than anything, Mr. Speaker, it is a broken promise, another broken Conservative promise. The Premier promised families that he would give them this break on their energy bill. He didn't say on their heating bill. He said it would be on their energy bill. And now the Premier is redefining that promise to be something different from what he actually said. There is not the slightest doubt in my mind, my colleagues' mind, or the mind of the people of Nova Scotia that this is a broken promise. So, Mr. Speaker, we come to this question of confidence. Can we have confidence in a government that would back off so quickly on a promise that formed one of the 7 key priorities in the last election campaign? And Mr. Speaker, in the most literal sense of the word, we do not have confidence in this government. I do not have confidence in this government's ability to manage the affairs of the province in the best interests of the people. My colleagues do not have confidence in this government. The people who sent me here tell me they do not have confidence in this government. I would like to read some of the emails and phone messages that I received since the budget was delivered, Mr. Speaker, but I'm afraid that almost all of them use at least one unparliamentary word. So I'm not able, I'm afraid, to actually quote from what my constituents are telling me. But what I will tell you, Mr. Speaker, is that in summary, they utterly lack confidence in this government. But that is not the same as the question of confidence that will face this House on or around Thursday, May 15th. That is a much different meaning of the word, and that is whether it is the will of this House to let the government continue. Because in the minority situation in which we find ourselves, it is within the power of the combined opposition parties to say to this government that we do not have confidence in your ability. We do not think that you should continue, that we think the decision should be made by the people. That is a decision not to be made today, Mr. Speaker, but it will be made very soon. Does this House have confidence in the government? It is difficult to have confidence in a government when there is such a gap between what they say and what they do, Mr. Speaker. Let me cite a couple of examples. Once again this year, the revenue estimates in the budget are not compliant with generally accepted accounting principles. Everybody thought we had got past the stage of books that do not follow the rules, but once again, the revenue estimates do not follow the rules. It's not me saying so, Mr. Speaker, it is the Auditor General, who is required by law every year to sign off on the revenue estimates, and he says once again, those revenue estimates of the government are not in conformity with generally accepted accounting principles. We have the government's year-end spending spree, Mr. Speaker, the likes of which we have not seen in many a year. Although the Premier says it's happened before, it happens in other provinces, the amount of money involved, Mr. Speaker, was very large, and I believe larger than we have ever seen before. The government has taken the Provincial Finance Act and the terms extraordinary revenue and defined them to mean something other than what any ordinary person would take it to mean, and said no, they do not, according to the law, have to take this extraordinary revenue and pay down the debt, but they can indeed choose to spend it on whatever they choose to spend it on, Mr. Speaker. It is difficult to have confidence in a government that does that. It is difficult to have confidence in a government that has created trust funds in order to shuffle money around from one fiscal year to the next. This is a device used first and most widely by Paul Martin when he was Federal Finance Minister, and I'm disappointed to see our provincial government adopting this method of obeying the letter of accounting rules while not obeying the spirit of them. Because, Mr. Speaker, if anybody looked at the budget documents, they would see that an extraordinarily and unusually large amount of money was spent on post-secondary education in the last fiscal year, and then it looks like there's a big drop in the amount of money being spent on post-secondary education this year, when the reality is that the trust fund was created, the money was booked last year, but is actually going to be spent this year. It may obey the accounting rules, Mr. Speaker, but it does not tell Nova Scotians the whole story about what their government is doing. And it is difficult to have confidence in a government that would do such a thing. I could stand here, Mr. Speaker, all day and cite dozens of examples where what the government says and what it does are different things. In my remarks in the Justice Administration Act, Mr. Speaker, I spoke about one such case that struck home to me because of a murder in my constituency, and that had to do with electronic tracking of offenders who were on house arrest or curfew. And the difference between what the government announced it was doing and what has actually happened in practice is frankly appalling. I think every one of my colleagues in their critic areas could cite example after example of such situations. It is difficult to have confidence in a government where there is such a gap between what the government says and what it does. It is difficult to have confidence in a government where there is such a gap between what they say and what the verifiable facts are. Let me cite a few examples, Mr. Speaker. Just last week in question period, the Premier stood up and said that Nova Scotia's credit rating is, quote, one of the highest in the country, end of quote. And for anyone seeking a reference for that quotation, it is on page 1935 of Hansard. The Premier of the province says we have an A+ rating. It is, quote, one of the highest in the country. Now, Mr. Speaker, my eyebrows went up when I heard that because I did not believe that to be so. And when I check the facts, I find out that it is in fact not so. There are 3 credit rating companies in Canada, and when you look at them, one rates Nova Scotia second lowest in the country. Another one rates Nova Scotia tied for second lowest in the country, and the other one has Nova Scotia tied for lowest in the country. Mr. Speaker, and it's in the government's own budget documents on page 3.23, if anybody doubts my facts and figures. Now, an A-plus rating sounds good until you know a little bit about the weird and wacky world of credit rating, where you realize that A-plus is actually not a very good grade. The highest grade in that particular category is AAA. And of course, provinces with good finances like British Columbia and Alberta have a AAA rating. Below AAA is AA. And Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario all have a AA rating above Nova Scotia's. There is a province with a AA minus rating, that is our neighbor New Brunswick. But that still, in the weird and wonderful world of credit rating, is above an A+. So we fall behind all of those provinces, and we are ahead only of Prince Edward Island and Newfoundland and Labrador. So, Mr. Speaker, that is just one example. The Premier stood up in question period last week and said not once but twice, look at us, we're great, we have an A+ rating, and then he went on to say it's one of the highest in the country, when it is demonstrably not so. Now, Mr. Speaker, you could do the same thing about most any economic indicator that you care to choose. Let's look at employment, for example. The government loves to vaunt its achievements with respect to employment. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, the employment numbers are quite high, but so they are in every province across the entire country. Over the past number of years, the economy is going very well. The tide has floated everybody's boat. The problem here in Nova Scotia is that our employment growth has gone up less than the rest of the country. Or to be more precise, Mr. Speaker, in fairness, that is true of employment in Atlantic Canada. The Atlantic Provinces Economic Council, the non-partisan body, Mr. Speaker, says, quote, Atlantic Canada's employment gains have not kept pace with national numbers, end of quote. And it also says later on, quote, Atlantic Canada's weaker job growth is found across the industry spectrum, end of quote. Now, Mr. Speaker, I remember the days, it weren't that long ago, when every time the employment numbers went out, the government would send out a news release claiming credit for the job creation. The problem was, of course, employment was up and down, and you'd get months where employment went down, and there we had radio silence. The government refused to take the blame. They found other factors. So when things were good, they took the credit. When things were bad, they pointed fingers. Thank goodness those days are behind us. We don't see the government issuing news releases every month like they used to. But, Mr. Speaker, we have to have a dose of reality about what the employment situation is in Nova Scotia. The latest figures from Statistics Canada, Mr. Speaker, show that the unemployment rate in Cape Breton stands at 15%. Neither the government nor we in this House can rest as long as there is one region of the province with an unemployment rate that is that high. And, Mr. Speaker, as I've said in previous years, that is coupled with an extremely low participation rate. That is the number of people in the adult population who are even looking for work, whether they are employed or not. And in Cape Breton, that is historically low, as it is commonly in depressed parts of the country, Mr. Speaker. So they combine a very low participation rate with a very high unemployment rate. And let us not hear anybody vaunting employment numbers in this House until we have done something to deal with that sort of situation. Another thing that the Premier likes to talk about is the debt cost. But what the documents show, Mr. Speaker, is that debt servicing costs are going to go up over the next several years. They're not going down. The net direct debt of the province this year, if the budget targets are met, will go down 0.1%, Mr. Speaker, the proverbial drop in the bucket. But next year, debt servicing costs will go up, and the year after that they will go up, and the year after that they will go up. No wonder indeed, Mr. Speaker, that the Premier chooses not to talk about that particular number. And then there's the question of the Crown share, which is completely absent from the budget, as it should be, because we don't know if there is any money that is going to be available. The ultimate result of the Crown share discussions could be zero, or it could be a lot more than that. If the Crown share panel report comes back while this House is sitting, we do expect the government to revise its budget and report to this House what it plans to do with that money. Mr. Speaker, we expect this government to seek the approval of the House if there is that extraordinary revenue gained this year. I want to emphasize again, the budget documents are completely silent about the Crown share. Any pronouncements the government has made about what it will do with that money are outside this Assembly, outside the budget documents, a statement of intent only on the part of the government, Mr. Speaker. We expect them to seek the approval of this House so that we can have a debate if indeed there is any money at all received on the Crown share. Let me turn then, Mr. Speaker, to another topic on which we have heard an extraordinary amount of nonsense, Mr. Speaker, except this time it's from the Liberal Party, and that is gas tax and regulation. Mr. Speaker, the system of gas regulation in this province was instituted for three reasons. One is to create stability in price. Once the price is set on a Friday, it stays the same until the following Friday, Mr. Speaker. And it has achieved that objective so that Nova Scotia drivers know what the price is going to be on a Tuesday, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I think, there's been the other benefit of course, New Brunswick's price goes up a day before ours, or down. It gets adjusted a day before ours, so Nova Scotia drivers have the benefit of having a pretty good signal about which way the price is going. The second objective of gas regulation, Mr. Speaker, was transparency, to get at this issue of people feel they're being gouged. Now, Mr. Speaker, the price is transparent. Media outlets predict, the media outlets know what the formula is, and they're able to predict what it is fairly accurately, Mr. Speaker. There's a lot of people who are making a lot of money out of petroleum prices, Mr. Speaker, but they're not in the province of Nova Scotia. Now, Mr. Speaker, the third purpose of gas regulation was to protect rural gas station owners, Mr. Speaker, to provide a guaranteed margin, and it has achieved that objective as well. Now, Mr. Speaker, the other day on the radio, I was listening to a gentleman from Richmond County who was saying how important the gas price regulation was to his business, Mr. Speaker. And I'd be interested to hear the conversation between the member from Richmond and that particular constituent. Or what about the gas dealer from Annapolis who ripped up his Liberal Party card because he couldn't believe that the party to which he'd showed his allegiance his entire life wanted to destroy his business, Mr. Speaker? I'd like to hear the conversation between the leader of the Liberal Party and that particular constituent, Mr. Speaker. Just for a moment, Mr. Speaker, I would like to pause and offer the floor to enable one of my colleagues to make an introduction.
Thank you. The Chair now recognizes the Honourable the Minister of Labour on an introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Honourable Member for ceding his time. I do want to welcome in the gallery opposite half of the class from Northeast Kings Elementary College, led by their teacher, Nova Keddy, who was the unofficial editor of my second book and taught all my three children. She doesn't look old enough for that, but she did. And we're delighted to have the students down. They have been a tour here. They were up at Parade Square with you, Premier. They went over to the caucus office to see how caucus office works, and I'd asked the members to welcome them and give them a warm welcome to the House. I should just explain what's going on to the students. This is a debate on budget. The budget was was tabled by the Minister of Finance, and now the critic for the opposition, the Honourable Graham Steele, a very honourable man, is speaking about their party's perspective on the budget. So if I could ask the members to welcome the students, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
The honourable member from Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Back on the topic of gas price regulation. Now, Mr. Speaker, we've always had an open mind about it. You have to allow it to work for a certain amount of time and then study it objectively and see if it's working. And you know what, Mr. Speaker, we're not married to it for any ideological reason. If it's working for the people, if it's achieving the objectives of stability, transparency, and protecting rural gas stations, then we're for it. And if it's not doing that, then we're against it. But what happened was, Mr. Speaker, is the government agreed to do a study after only 6 months, giving in to one of the demands of the members from the third party over there. And the result of this study, which cost a great deal of money, was that it was too early to say whether gas price regulation was working or not, Mr. Speaker. It was too early to say. But it was one of the demands of the Liberal Party, and I've often said, Mr. Speaker, the government should have billed the cost of that study back to the Liberal Party caucus office because they were responsible for wasting the money. It is time to look at it again. It is time to look at it again objectively, based on the facts. The Liberal Party announced their opposition to gas price regulation before it ever came into effect. And therefore, they are married ideologically to a certain position. They feel they can't move it off now, and the facts no longer seem to matter to them, Mr. Speaker. Nor does it on the gas tax either, Mr. Speaker. And we hear enough nonsense from the Liberal Party on gas price regulation, but we get even more on the gas tax, Mr. Speaker. There are certain immutable laws of public finance, and one of those laws is that if you cut your revenue, you have to cut services or get a new revenue source or run a deficit. And what the Liberal Party consistently refuses to do is to say which one of those options it chooses. There are no other options, Mr. Speaker. It is an immutable law of public finance. Either you raise taxes or you cut services or you run a deficit. You simply can't blow a hole in your revenue and pretend that nothing is going to change. Mr. Speaker, now, as proof of my thesis, Mr. Speaker, let me refer to a couple of our neighboring provinces, which by coincidence happen to have Liberal governments. What happened in the province of New Brunswick, Mr. Speaker? They cut the gas tax, Mr. Speaker, and good for them. But the part the Liberal Party of Nova Scotia always leaves out is at exactly the same time, in the same budget, they raised income tax to offset the drop in revenue, Mr. Speaker, because the Liberal Party of New Brunswick understands that there are certain immutable laws of public finance. They blew a hole in their gas tax revenue and they filled it in with income tax revenue. Now, the government of Prince Edward Island made a different choice, Mr. Speaker. The Liberal government of Prince Edward Island has just delivered a budget that has a deficit. Now, Mr. Speaker, I thought we were past that in this part of the country, indeed across the country. I thought we were all opposed to deficits now. I know my party is. I know their party is. It's difficult to, there's no NDP government, Mr. Speaker, for a long time that's run a deficit, Mr. Speaker. But the Liberal Party of PEI, the Liberal government of PEI, has just delivered a budget with a built-in deficit because they recognize that there are certain immutable laws of public finance. You've only got 3 choices. But the Liberal Party would want the people of Nova Scotia to believe that they can cut revenue and nothing else will change. It's just not the way government works, Mr. Speaker. And when I hear that kind of...
Order, please. The honourable member from Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order, I would find it very unfortunate that in the year Democracy 250, when we have students visiting here the House, that they would have to see honourable members in any way trying to mislead the House. But I would ask if the honourable member from Fairview, whose party was pursuing the 8% cut in home heating oil and electricity, which cost the government of Nova Scotia $75 million in revenue. I'm wondering if that honourable member would table for us here in the House today what plan his party has as to how the government was going to replace the loss of $75 million in revenue, because if he's going to criticise what our party has been proposing, one would think that he would at least let this House and the visitors to this House know exactly what their plan was for that lost revenue as per his economic lesson.
Thank you. That is not a point of order. The honourable member from Halifax Fairview has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do think it's unfortunate when members of this House take advantage of the fact that a point of order is always in order to get up and give a mini speech. I just think it's not terribly respectful of the traditions of the House, Mr. Speaker. Now, the other thing about the gas tax, Mr. Speaker, is that it's going to be swallowed up. Mr. Speaker, the other important question about anybody who wants to cut gas taxes is that when the price of gasoline goes up, as it will, and the cut gets swallowed up, what do you do then? Once you've fired your cannon, what do you do next? Because, Mr. Speaker, let there be no doubt about it, gasoline prices are going up. We have to be ready for it. We have to get used to it, Mr. Speaker. But the Liberal Party's answer is superficial and will not work. Now, Mr. Speaker, it is true that the government does get a benefit from high petroleum prices, because one of the things that I noticed in the budget on the revenue side is that there is an enormous jump this year in petroleum royalties because of the production mainly of natural gas, the price of which has gone up commensurate with petroleum, Mr. Speaker. And one could say, Mr. Speaker, I don't think it would be going too far to say that that is the one thing that saves the government's budget this year, is an extraordinary increase in petroleum revenues. Now, this is a government that, since it was elected in 1999, has surfed the wave of a growing economy, of large increases in revenue every year. They've never really had to make those difficult choices that they like to talk about. And even this year, Mr. Speaker, they have managed to find ways to avoid the difficult choices, because out of the blue, they get a gift of a large increase in petroleum royalties, as well as the creation of trust funds, the objective of which is to shuffle money from one fiscal year to the next. Now, Mr. Speaker, each of my colleagues could talk about, in their critic area, the reasons why it is difficult to have confidence in this government. And again, Mr. Speaker, I draw the distinction between confidence in the most literal sense of the word and the vote of confidence that will be held on or around May 15th. But let me just mention a few things in my other critic area, Mr. Speaker, the Department of Environment. And these could be repeated by our critic for community services, our critic for labor, our critic for justice, our critic for transportation, our critic for health, our critic for education. I'm going to take a few minutes to focus on the Department of Environment, Mr. Speaker, to show why it is difficult for us to have confidence in this government, and why it ought to be difficult for the people of the province to have confidence in this government, Mr. Speaker. With respect to the environment, the government has missed all of the key opportunities it had in this budget to do something that would really work. Mr. Speaker, the Ecology Action Centre, the foremost environmental advocacy group in the province, says, quote, "The budget is a testament to the need for less rhetoric and more action." End of quote, Mr. Speaker. For example, we have a need in this province to set efficiency targets for fuel oil. This province is unusual in the large percentage of people who heat their homes with fuel oil, Mr. Speaker. It is at or around 60%. About 60% of all homes in Nova Scotia get their heat from oil. And yet all of the work, all of the action on efficiency is on the electricity side. And we need to see more from this government. There is much more that could be done. It would be the single best investment this government could make in energy conservation, is helping people to use less fuel oil but they have not done that. A report commissioned by their own Conserve Nova Scotia agency laid out 16 programs that would lead to efficiency gains, and it ranked them in order of cost effectiveness. What has the government done? It has chosen in this budget the most expensive and the least effective option for reducing emissions by funding a transit tax credit. Now, Mr. Speaker, let me be very clear. We are not opposed to a transit tax credit because it will put a little bit of money in people's pockets. But it is far from being the only answer, the best answer, a sufficient answer to the question of climate change, because the amount of money is so small for any particular individual or any family, it is highly unlikely that it will change anybody's behavior. For people who are already taking the bus and have a monthly bus pass, they will get a very small annual tax credit. Very small, but only if they earn enough money to pay provincial tax, because it is a non-refundable credit. So let's not forget that. You have to be earning enough money already to be paying provincial tax in order to get any benefit at all from this provincial tax credit. Mr. Speaker, so it's not going to motivate anybody to take the bus who's not taking the bus today. The amount of money is so small that it is not conceivable that anybody currently taking their car will look at this transit tax credit and say, that's what I need, that's enough for me to move from the car to transit. It's just not enough. And, Mr. Speaker, on top of that, it's a very expensive option compared to efficiency gains that could be made much more effectively, much more cheaply if some of the other programs had been pursued. Because after all, Mr. Speaker, the business of government is not necessarily about doing good things. Anybody who has $8 billion to spend can do a few good things. The issue is putting the money that is available to its highest and best use. To say, of all the options available, the one that is going to give us the best return on our investment is option number 1 out of 16, or 2, or 3. Mr. Speaker, that's what it's all about. So no one's going to stand up in this House and say a transit tax credit is a bad thing. Of course it isn't. It's just, of the 16 programs identified by Conservative Nova Scotia, it is the most expensive and the least effective. You could say the same thing about the rebirth of the Keep the Heat program, Mr. Speaker, which did not work before. There's no reason to think that it will work now. The Ecology Action Centre and the Affordable Energy Coalition have been pleading with the government to reintroduce a redesigned program. The government has reintroduced it but hasn't redesigned it. An opportunity has been missed. And Mr. Speaker, with respect to a carbon tax, cap and trade systems, Mr. Speaker, there is no movement in this budget at all. As the Ecology Action Centre says, quote, Nova Scotia and British Columbia have a lot in common on climate change policy, except when it comes to concrete policy implementation. End of quote. And what that says, Mr. Speaker, is that the government talks a good game, but doesn't actually take meaningful steps forward. In contrast, British Columbia is taking very meaningful steps forward. It is leading the country on the climate change file. Where is the government of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker? On this issue, the budget is silent, or at best, Mr. Speaker, it is whispering when we need decisive action. Now, Mr. Speaker, this caucus does not support a carbon tax. We do not think that is the right way to go. We do support a revenue-neutral carbon incentive, such as is being pursued in British Columbia. We do support the entry of Nova Scotia into a cap-and-trade system, but we need to be there, Mr. Speaker. We need to be at the table where those programs are being designed today. And instead, this government is still messing around with intensity targets, which is the vehicle that is used by people who oppose climate change action. They talk intensity targets when what they really want to do is business as usual. Mr. Speaker, so on the environment, the budget represents a real lost opportunity. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, in the most literal sense of the word, we lack confidence in the ability of this government to manage the affairs of the province in the best interest of the people. That is different from the vote of confidence that will be held in this House on May 15th. That is a matter that we take very seriously. If all the members of the opposition vote against the budget, there will be an automatic election. It will start the following day, Mr. Speaker, and that is a very serious thing. That is not something to be done lightly. We need to weigh everything in the balance, Mr. Speaker. There are good things in the budget, and I mentioned some of them after the budget was delivered on Tuesday, Mr. Speaker. Of course there are some good things in the budget. I'll say again, Mr. Speaker, it is not possible for a government to spend $8.3 billion without doing some good things. But there are so many missed opportunities. It's difficult to have confidence in the government. There is such a gap between what the government says and what it actually does on the ground that it is difficult to have confidence in the government. There is such a gap, Mr. Speaker, between what the government says and the facts that can be verified to be true, Mr. Speaker, that it is difficult to have confidence in the government. So we will move forward. We will consult our constituents and people around the province to see what it is that they want us to do. If they want us to vote against this budget and take the chance the government will fall, then we will do that. If the people that we talk to express, on balance, confidence in this government, Mr. Speaker, we will vote for the budget. With those remarks, my colleagues and I look forward to the budget debate over the next 2 weeks so that, like all members of the House, when it comes to vote on that matter of confidence, we will do the right thing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the honourable member from Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it is a pleasure for me to rise this year and speak again on the budget for the year 2008-9. I have done so on a number of previous occasions, and it is a privilege for me to be the spokesman for our party and to, again, address directly the issues that are presented in the budget for this year. Before I begin, I would like to congratulate the Minister of Finance for his very tremendous effort in pulling this together and being so much a part of the process, and for presenting the budget when he did 2 days ago. It again was a very great effort, we know, and we commend him for the hard work and the excellent effort he's done, and to the staff who have supported him throughout. Mr. Speaker, in beginning the look at the budget, I think it's always important to have a context and to consider what exactly is before us in terms of the financial capacity of this province, where we've come from, and what the abilities that we have within our own means to move our province forward, because that's really why we're here. We want to find the means and the right programs, the right tools to help stimulate our economy, to help young people work, to address our demographic challenges, which is seen through the education and training of our young people and providing opportunities for them to stay and remain and work and contribute in this province. And we want to help those Nova Scotians who've been here for years to continue to thrive. So we have some very big agenda items to consider. Certainly the issue around the environment and around how we can keep pace and improve our environment, how we can be leaders instead of laggards in this very important issue, are also on our minds. And as the members of this House know, there are multiple priorities, and all of us are dealing with them. But in terms of our capacity, Mr. Speaker, it's really important that all members of the House recognize the tremendous increase in financial capacity that we have seen in the last 9 years under this government. And I credit it to the hard work of Nova Scotians, to a more positive economy, to the increases in surpluses that we've seen federally, which have allowed more monies to flow to the province, which were not available in the 1990s, and created tremendous stress not only on the Nova Scotia government in the 1990s, but right across the country on all provincial governments. It was a time of crisis, a time of lack of resources, downloading on provinces and downloading on municipalities, as we still hear about today, because there was not enough money, Mr. Speaker, to fund the programs that we needed. And Nova Scotia was hampered by having a huge debt, which I'll talk about later. We're still living with the legacy of our debt. And we had a lot of difficulties to overcome. But today's budget that we're looking at now shows a total revenue of $8.45 billion. And that is 75% higher than the $4.8 billion that was the total revenue in 1999. And I think that means, and all of us can see that means, that there's a huge increase in the ability to fund new projects, to have some legacies, to look forward and make a mark for Nova Scotians. And my concern is that a lot of that money has not been directed in the kind of investments that would make our province stronger for the future, and that we have enjoyed some good years, and we've spent a lot of the money just paying the grocery bills and buying, maybe we've been buying nicer food, but we're not addressing the legacy projects that will improve our house, build up our strength and our infrastructure so that we're ready for the lean years and we're ready to be leaders in new economies rather than people who hang on to the old economies. The offshore royalties this year alone, Mr. Speaker, are $513 million. And that's the largest amount that we've enjoyed in petroleum offshore royalties since we've begun to have an industry in this province. And I'm very happy to see that. Now, I know the member from Fairview referenced the fact that that's how this budget is balanced. That's how this budget is able to deliver on some of the promises that are in there and some of the new initiatives that are in there. But, Mr. Speaker, I would challenge that when you have something that's a non-renewable resource and that we're benefiting from the royalties as we export and sell this product, and it's not going to renew itself, that the government of Nova Scotia should, from the very onset of this money, begun to think of how we could invest for future industries and for future growth. And I would suggest that there are many ways that could have been done, but I believe there is a huge opportunity in the renewable energies, in investing in wind and tidal, in solar and geothermal energies. That's the future. In fact, petroleum is the commodity of the last century. It's declining in its importance because we have to replace it for many reasons. Because it's a resource that's getting harder and harder to find, because a lot of it is found in unstable parts of the world, because it is harming our environment irrevocably. So we have a large amount of royalties this year, which is one of the good news pieces of the budget. However, I believe they have not been addressed to prepare us for the future. Our debt now, Mr. Speaker, is $12.35 billion. Now, when this government came to power in 1999, they had a debt at that time of $11.2 billion. And we all know this is the 7th balanced budget that's been brought in. We've heard the finance minister say so and boast, and we applaud that. As has been mentioned, the economic vibrancy of Canada has allowed most provinces to go towards balanced budgets and to be more fiscally responsible. But the debt of this province has grown. It's grown by over $1 billion in those years, and that cannot be forgotten. It does not mean that although the budgets have been balanced, that the debt did not grow. And this is in fact, we have just seen the first year where the debt has gone down any amount whatsoever. So yes, hopefully we're at that point where it tips and we can start to move in the direction of taking this debt at least piece by piece and seeing it retired. But we have around our necks a huge weight, and that is the debt that we're carrying of almost $12.5 billion each, or for our province, and it is the second highest debt in the country. And in discussing the debt that this province carries, I would be remiss if I did not remind the House that half of that debt was the legacy of an earlier premier whose name is John Buchanan, and that was a Tory premier, Mr. Speaker. in whose years, I guess, we said no to nothing and everything was purchased and there was no sense of preparing for the future. So although we have had a balanced budget for a number of years, although we have 75% more spending capacity than we had in 1999, my question to the House, and the question that Nova Scotians ask themselves, is, are we in fact any better off? And when you ask Nova Scotians, I'm afraid to say they do not feel the roads are better, or health care is better, or more accessible. They're not happy about the level of education, the performance of our students. Our universities have a lot of questions around maintaining their tuition rates and attracting students to their universities. So there are still many, many areas that are not improved, and those are the central areas to our society. So I think there is a great deal more work that needs to be done, and a lot of work that should have been done with that increased capacity, with these good years that we've enjoyed. And in talking about the economy, we know, Mr. Speaker, that there is a decline now in the United States economy. Over a period of time, that will be felt here at home, because usually there's a couple of years at most lag between their downturn and what we'll feel here. And yet we're still projecting an increase in our GDP, and we're still looking for a continuation of those good years of growth. Remember, all those revenues I spoke about are increased corporate taxes, increased HST from a buoyant retail and sales market, increased personal taxes because more people are working and perhaps their salaries are a little higher. Also, we don't index our income tax, Mr. Speaker, so of course we've been able to grab a little bit more each year under the current rules of the Tory government, because we don't keep pace with the indexing that the federal government has to allow more people to really to protect their income from inflation, which is what the indexing does. Here you can have added taxes when your income has only gone up as much as the cost of living. So that doesn't protect people. So, Mr. Speaker, there are some good things about debt, and I did want to go to that, some good moves that have been made this year that I think we need to congratulate the Finance Minister for taking. And one of them was the fact that this year we have taken all of our, eliminated all of our foreign currency exposure. And that is that with the high Canadian dollar, the government saw fit to repatriate our debt to Canadian dollars. And I think that's a very important thing because, again, going back to the 1990s, after the big borrowing years of earlier Tory governments, we had a lot of foreign debt. And as currencies changed, we had to pay more than even we had anticipated, because we had to adjust to currency fluctuations and in fact sometimes a great deal of uncertainty. So that has been eliminated this year, Mr. Speaker, and I think that was the right thing to do. It was a good decision, and I'm glad to see that we have finally been able to get to that point. And really we can thank the high Canadian dollar and the fact that the government saw the opportunity and took it. So I'm glad to see that. I know that at the same time, because of our expanded economy, we have a lot more capacity to service the debt. But it is still hundreds of millions of dollars that we spend each year out of our budget in order to pay for just the debt servicing, not even to bring the debt down, but just to pay the interest on it. And Mr. Speaker, that hurts us tremendously, and that's money that we can no longer spend on our programs, on providing early childhood education, on helping our students, on supporting public education. All of those things are so important, and we don't have that capacity, Mr. Speaker, because we're spending over $800 million a year on interest payments. And that amount, even though it has become a smaller percentage of the overall budget, is still huge in a province like Nova Scotia, where we have less than 1 million people and we spend $800 million on interest payments. Yeah, so it really is something that we have to see change, and we want to see a greater commitment to the funds that come to this province going towards debt reduction. And we have said so from the very start, Mr. Speaker. The Liberal government, or the Liberal Party, has been very strong on the point of putting extraordinary income towards the debt. Yeah, Mr. Speaker. This year, we have had exactly the kind of extraordinary payment to the province, or at least we're anticipating it. But even though the Tories themselves had recognized in the past that these kind of extraordinary payments should be put down on the debt 100%, no questions asked, a decision was made by the Conservative government to do otherwise. The first issue I'm speaking about, Mr. Speaker, is the Crown share agreement, or that we are waiting for. And the Crown share is a long-standing dispute that we've had with the federal government. It dates back to the 1980s, and it does relate to offshore oil and other issues. But the fact is that we saw no hope that it was going to be resolved, Mr. Speaker. It hadn't appeared that it was going to be looked at ever, since more than 25 years had passed. And a number of years ago, in 2003, when the Honourable Neil LeBlanc first brought in the 2003 debt management plan, he specifically mentioned that the offshore Crown share dispute, if it were ever solved, would be an example of the kind of funds that should go directly on the debt. Remember, this is in the context of him announcing a debt reduction plan. And he said any extraordinary income that comes to the province of Nova Scotia should be put 100% towards our huge debt, which is impairing our ability to deliver services to our people. So in his own words, he said to do that, and yet here we are in 2008 with hopefully a resolution coming soon to the Crown share disagreement that we've had, and the government has chosen to spend a portion of that Crown share money on something other than the debt. And I think that is a short-sighted political decision, Mr. Speaker, which should never have been allowed to take place. I would have hoped that there would have been stronger, more fiscally minded voices within the Cabinet to have prevented that from happening. The Finance Act as well, which is something that was amended in 2005, Mr. Speaker, says very clearly, this is again talking about extraordinary monies and any additional income that the province receives outside of the regular forms of revenue, saying that it should be used again to pay down the debt. And in that, Section 62A of the Provincial Finance Act states, all extraordinary revenue that accrue to the province in any fiscal year must be paid into the Public Debt Management Fund. I don't know what else you could call the Crown share monies when they do arrive, Mr. Speaker, but they are exactly that, extraordinary. In this section, it goes on to say, extraordinary revenue means revenue that is not typical for a government reporting entity, not included in the annual budget of the province, and would not normally be expected to become a typical revenue source, and that is designated as extraordinary revenue by the minister. Now, Mr. Speaker, can you imagine this? That in this day and age, 2008, in an age of transparency and openness in government, the government of Nova Scotia decided that even though all of these previous criteria that I've named in this act, the clause of the act says that the monies are extraordinary, it also requires the minister to recognize the money as extraordinary. And if the minister decides to call something a rose by any other name, if they choose to call it not a rose, then it's not a rose. That's really what we're saying. In this day and age, the minister can say it's not extraordinary when any grade school child would tell you it was extraordinary. That anybody, whether they had financial background or not, would know that under this definition, Crown share is an extraordinary amount of income coming into this province, which we will not see again. And Mr. Speaker, there's another big problem with allocating money from the Crown share already to other things other than the debt. And that is a tremendous shortcoming that the government doesn't even know how much this is going to bring into the province of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. We have no idea. We have a panel of 3 people working on this in Ottawa who were supposed to report by March 15th, but they didn't, and they have yet to report. And yet the government rushed through at the end of the fiscal year and allocated the funds so that they would not go to the debt. They made a direct announcement of other uses for the funds that would be applied to last year's budget and spending, so that this legislature would not have a say in it, Mr. Speaker. It would not appear in this year's budget. It would not come here for discussion, and they've made their own decision on how to move forward with that. Mr. Speaker, I think that in doing so, they've made somewhat a mockery of the process here in the legislature, because the whole process we're embarking on is hours and hours of discussion and questioning of the minister and their staff on estimates. And by pushing through on March 31st, massive spending, really, massive allocations of funds to other projects and other priorities of the government without bringing it here to the legislature. They've circumvented the authority that this legislature has, and they have really not held the public in high esteem in terms of their ability to influence and to speak to the matters that are important to them. So I think that again has been very different from the earlier approach of the previous Premier, John Hamm, who, when he received the large commitment of funds that related to the Atlantic Accord, he put 100% of the funds towards the debt retirement. And, you know, at the time we had asked for that, the Liberal Party had called for that, and we applauded his courage in doing so, because we know the government has a lot of requests, and we understand that you're under a lot of pressure. But at the same time, Mr. Speaker, we expect that the debt will be looked after as well when you get extraordinary amounts of income. I've already said there's an extraordinary expansion in the province's own source revenue, in the amounts of money that we generate ourselves. So when we get something that's unexpected, it should go to the right thing. On top of that, Mr. Speaker, this year, this spring, at the end of the fiscal year past, which would be March 31st of this year, 2008, the government chose to spend an additional $300 million that they suddenly found in last year's budget. In December, we had an update. We get quarterly updates, which we appreciate, on how the budgets are going and what's being spent. And in December of this year, when we received the quarterly update, we were told that it was going to be a tough year, that they, you know, if they pinched and changed a few things here and there, if departments were careful with their spending, we'd still have our balanced budget, but it was not going to be an easy chore to get to that point at the end of the year. And that was the last official update that we had as legislators, or that the people of Nova Scotia had. And all of a sudden, there is an announcement made on March 31st that the government has $300 million extra, and that they have allocated it to spending priorities determined only by the cabinet of this province, only by the Premier and his cabinet, not by the legislature, not through the normal budget process. And that is purely political, Mr. Speaker. We have asked, and the Liberal Party and our leader have asked, that in future all of the spending priorities that come through as special appropriations or additional appropriations be brought back to the legislature. Because I'm sure I'm speaking for all members of my party, and I'm sure other members of the House, we would be more than willing to return to the legislature to look at exceptional amounts of money and how they should be spent. And Mr. Speaker, I'm not saying that the government spent them on the wrong things. They may have been priorities, pressing priorities. Perhaps they were things that were urgently in need of expenditure. And that case can be made here in the Assembly. And we'll listen, and we can understand when those things are certainly the right thing to do. So, Mr. Speaker, I would stress the fact that all members of this legislature are reasonable people, are willing to sit down and look at the rationale for this kind of spending. But it should come here and not simply be blown in a last-minute effort to see that money did not go on the debt where it belonged. You know, it really belonged there rather than being spent. Mr. Speaker, once again, the whole idea of the Crown share, we need to make the point strongly that that was money prematurely committed, because we do not have that money, and we don't even know the full amount that will be arranged. As I say, it's in the hands of a three-person panel to make a recommendation. How do we know how much is going to be in that amount? And so that is another reason why it defies the legacy that was left to them by the previous Premier, John Hamm, who showed fiscal conservatism and fiscal responsibility. Mr. Speaker, there are some good things in the budget that I'd like to just speak to briefly. I believe that the expenditures that are in there for post-secondary education are very important, and we do look at that as a positive step. These students of the province, the university and college students, have been very organized, very focused in their efforts to get the attention of the legislature and the government, asking for support to help them get their education, get a grounding, be able to afford to stay here in this province. What we've had is a situation where we've had the highest tuitions in the country, and as a result, students have had to maximize their student loans, take on extra debt, Many didn't qualify, middle-income families not qualifying for student loans. In those instances, they've had to take on personal debt through lines of credit or family loans, and it's been a tremendous burden on students. And in this budget, we've seen some relief for students, and in the lead up to the budget, we saw some relief for students as well. We know that they need that help, Mr. Speaker, and I think that we would agree that investing in education has been the way that many other economies have managed to improve their lot. And I'm thinking of countries like Ireland and others that have invested heavily in post-secondary education to allow their young people to stay and study there and remain there. And this could be the way for us as well, Mr. Speaker, because our post-secondary education institutions are one of the main, I believe, advantages that we have economically here in this province. We have a great network of universities and colleges. They have a strong reputation. We attract students from around the country and around the world. We have about 4,000 international students studying here in Nova Scotia, and we have a good number of students from other provinces. And that's an advantage to us that we need to maintain. And unfortunately, the universities have had to increase tuition because they haven't had the money and the support to continue to offer the quality of education without increasing the cost to students. So this year, we do see a commitment to our post-secondary students through a freezing in tuition, through a rebate program back to Nova Scotia students who are studying in their own province here in Nova Scotia. And we also have seen that at the end of that three-year plan, the students coming from elsewhere in Canada will be given a little bit of support as well in order to keep the gap between our Nova Scotia students studying here and the ones that come from other provinces to keep that from growing too high. So those are important moves and expensive investments in post-secondary education. And I think that the government needs to know that we see the importance of that sector and the importance of our young people. And we have some tremendous challenges, as you know, Mr. Speaker, with demographics. And the university system will be one way for us to attract more students to come here and hopefully stay. Mr. Speaker, could you tell me what time I began my talk?
The honourable member began at 2:36.
Well, thank you very much. Lots of time left. Mr. Speaker, in talking about our demographic challenge, I think it's important that we again focus on education, because the students that we attract to Nova Scotia, and we are a net importer of students from other provinces, those students have, they have an attachment and form I think, an affection for our province, and many of them want to stay. And if our economy strengthens and offers the opportunity, they will stay here. In fact, my understanding is that about 25% of the graduates from other provinces stay and contribute and become Nova Scotians. And that's exactly what we want, Mr. Speaker. We need to do everything in our power to make Nova Scotia the kind of province that people will want to come to and stay and live here. And we have, many people here in the legislature that have come here to study and have stayed as citizens of our province. What we need to do as well, Mr. Speaker, is invite people from around the world and do more on the immigration file. I think that that's something that was fairly silent in the budget. There's some more money for our settlement agencies, and that's important that the groups like the Metropolitan Immigrant Settlement Association, MISA, the YMCA, and other smaller organizations that are helping to support newcomers to Nova Scotia are given the support that they need, because they need the funds in order to advance programs that are going to help people who move here from other countries to put down roots and to feel a part of our society. And I'm very anxious that we do more on that front, and that we do some more legislative changes that might make this a more attractive place as well. I think through the nominee program, we have the opportunity to do more, and government should be using that tool to its full advantage. And without going into too much detail, Mr. Speaker, this year has not been a good year for the nominee program. A majority of the people who arrived in Nova Scotia under our provincially sponsored program came as economic immigrants, and that program has suffered a black eye really this year, when we discovered that certainly it was not working as intended, that many people had not received the kind of experience that they had expected and in fact been promised in our promotion of the program internationally. And so that still remains to be looked at as the new year unfolds financially. But my fear, Mr. Speaker, is that it hampers the whole issue around what's gone on in the past is now hampering our Office of Immigration in going forward and making the kind of changes that are needed to improve our attractiveness as a region and as a province. We need to do more because even though our numbers are up, they're still very low compared to other parts of the country. Mr. Speaker, in addition to the population declines, I think we need to look at what we can do to stimulate the economy. And we have a lagging economy in this province. Although we've had increases and although we've had an economy that's expanded, we have not enjoyed the kind of expansion that other provinces in Canada have had. And in the last year, we were boasting about increases in our GDP of, I believe, 1.6%. Whereas the rest of Canada were way ahead of us. We had the slowest growing economy in the entire country, Mr. Speaker. Yeah. That does not in any way prepare us for the future, prepare us for providing the jobs and activity for young people that we desperately need. We need an economy that is far more vibrant and growing. And so what I would suggest, Mr. Speaker, is that when the government boasts about its growth and its superior performance, that we remember we have got to look at what's happening around us. And if we're advancing by a few steps and the rest of the world is advancing by leaps and bounds, we are falling well behind. And it's very important that that be addressed head on. Mr. Speaker, in the budget, we're estimating growth of about 1.8 or 9%, I think, are the assumptions for this year's budget. And as I mentioned in the start of my budget address, the American economy has turned around and is going slowly now. They are facing a recession, and this is very much going to be felt in Canada. And my understanding is that the Canadian average now is down, in terms of their projections for next year, down to about 1.1% GDP growth. And if in fact all of the economic think tanks and the Bank of Canada and all the other groups are now beginning to lower their expectations for next year, that's going to have a tremendous impact on this budget. So I know it's hard to keep pace with the latest assumptions and the latest changes in the economy, but I'm worried, and I'd just like to signal that I really do see a concern in the fact that the Canadian assumptions now are lower, and they're lower than what we're assuming. And since Nova Scotia's been tied for the last in terms of GDP growth, I don't think we're going to outpace the Canadian economy this year. So we had better be ready to have some other, I guess, plans and profiles about how we're going to react if, in fact, we have that significant shrinking in the economy. Mr. Speaker, this year, in terms of trying to keep more of our young people, I guess give them an incentive to stay in the province, the government's increased the tax credit for graduates, for young people who find work and stay in Nova Scotia. And it was introduced last year at $1,000 per year, and it comes off the taxes paid by young people that are here and employed. And I'm glad to see that that's been expanded to $2,000 per student. This is per graduate. I think that may help, but it's also a program that I think needs to be assessed as we go along. I think that it's very new. It's only been a few years that other provinces have tried this as well. And by introducing it even at $2,000 a head, we're really keeping pace there with New Brunswick and with other provinces. So we need to look at this in a few years' time, I would say within perhaps just a short period of time, and see whether or not it is bringing us the benefit that we would like to see. Because if it is not having a measurable impact on the retention of young people, then I think we should look at some other means to spend that money if this isn't the way to do it. I think when a new program like that comes in, it's important to measure its effectiveness. So that would be one of my concerns on that point, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in terms of the economy, there is another concern, and that is the slowing down of our exports. And Nova Scotia is a province that has thrived through having active exports, really, in fact, from before the time of Confederation. Our economy has been built on exports. And we are a small province and a small population. We will not meet our potential or maximize our prosperity by trading internally and only looking inwardly. We have to look at the rest of the world, and we have to play our role in that regard. And the signal is worrisome over the last 5 or 6 years in terms of our exports and their stagnant position. At the same time, imports are growing at a very fast rate, Mr. Speaker. In fact, in 2001, we were pretty balanced. We had about $5 billion in both imports and exports. And in recent years, this has changed so that we now have a trade deficit of $2.3 billion. So we're importing $2.3 billion worth of goods above what we're exporting. And that really is a little window into the circumstance around our forestry industry, our fisheries, and some of the other exports that we have built our economy on. Some of them are manufacturing, but a lot of the strength of our exports have been in primary industries. And we need to look at what's happening in those industries. I think some of them are global prices that make it very difficult for us. But if that is the case, we need to help in the restructuring and help to move our economy more to a knowledge-based economy, to IT, to the kind of companies that are setting up here in our province today. And we all know of some of the success stories that are employing Nova Scotians and exporting their product from here. A lot of it is in the digital animation, in games technology, in IT for business and industry. And there's some tremendous things happening in our province, but we need to tap into that and support that. And there are good tie-ins to the university as well, Mr. Speaker, because our university sector allows us to commercialize a lot more medical technologies and cutting-edge improvements, really, and cutting-edge waves that we could be riding in terms of improving our economy and really getting in step with the next century, the century we're now well into in 2008. As I said earlier, this century is going to be built on very different foundations than was the case in earlier times. So we need to make sure that our government takes a stand and helps those industries to thrive, because we need exports and we need to be in the right field. Mr. Speaker, there was some talk about the Atlantic Gateway and support for the Gateway in this budget, but I would like to see the government working as a team, working with industry, and working with our neighbours in New Brunswick and PEI, so that when we go to Ottawa asking for support for an Atlantic Gateway, we have a strong regional voice. Right now, if Ottawa sees us arguing or disputing with each other about who gets the largest piece of this pie, you can expect that we'll get a much smaller amount of money to help us develop, if any. What we need to do is to show that we recognize that we are part of a vibrant region, and that Ottawa should see that we can work together so that there's a maximization of the benefits that come from an Atlantic Gateway. And we will not get as far as if we allow ourselves to be divided within the province or outside of our province as well. Mr. Speaker, today I would like to touch on the Atlantic Accord as well, because that has been very much on the minds of Nova Scotians throughout the year. I know it's a subject that the Premier would much rather forget about and would prefer not to hear about today, but it's certainly been, a source of great dismay for Nova Scotians, because in just a few short years ago, in 2005, an agreement was signed that allowed us to keep our revenue from the offshore resources. And that was a hard-fought agreement that the previous Premier John Hamm was able to win because of a good relationship with the Liberal government in Ottawa at the time. And many of us were present when that agreement was signed at the World Trade Center. And Mr. Speaker, a short time later, just really in a matter of months later, we see that agreement thrown aside and rewritten to suit a new Prime Minister in Ottawa. And it's been a great cause of as I say, dismay and in fact, damage to our province to see that kind of a flip-flop in terms of the way we were treated with great disrespect. The agreement initially, Mr. Speaker, was both an economic development agreement and a legislated agreement that protected our resources, so that as a province, as we enjoyed these larger petroleum royalties, we'd be able to advance and move ahead as a province and not see our equalization payments decreased commensurate with our small but growing wealth. And in the meantime, Mr. Speaker, probably the cornerstone of that Atlantic Accord was that it was recognized by all parties that equalization agreements change over time, and that from year to year they will be different. But what was really central to the agreement that was signed was that as equalization agreements changed from year to year, we would also see that this Atlantic Accord would remain intact, and that whatever agreements came into place, it would not undermine the intent of the Atlantic Accord. So, Mr. Speaker, as we carried on through the year, we found that the new Prime Minister in Ottawa has done just that. He has said we have a new equalization agreement, and we're no longer willing to honor the Atlantic Accord that was so recently signed. And it should be mentioned that the Prime Minister in Ottawa, Prime Minister Harper, actually had campaigned saying that he would honor that agreement and that there was no greater fraud than a promise unkept. And we will remind him of that as we go forward. But, Mr. Speaker, my concern is that the province of Nova Scotia has lost significantly in the ensuing months of negotiations. The Premier campaigned against the Atlantic Accord changes for 4 months. He went to the Senate in Ottawa and he championed the cause. He called on federal MPs that were all federal MPs, in fact, to vote against the budget because it did not honor the Atlantic Accord. And yet, yes, and yet the Premier of our province backed off on his whole campaign. He abandoned some of the MPs who listened to his plea, and has actually, the Premier went ahead with another agreement. I guess we're calling it a clarification agreement with his partners in Ottawa. And yes, he did abandon the member for Cumberland, Colchester, Musquodoboit, I believe it is. Yeah, who felt strongly about the accord and felt that his party had misled the people of Nova Scotia. One of my concerns, Mr. Speaker, that I want to raise is that around the whole new clarification agreement, our party has been able to find no clarification. We have put in a number of FOIPOP requests to this government. We have asked for the assumptions around the projections that are in place to 2020. We've asked for what the models were, the economic models that were used. We've asked for correspondence between the province and the federal government. Yeah, how much time? I'm not sure. Find out again. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yes, well, I'd like to go back to this FOIPOP Act, Mr. Speaker, because right now it's not serving our party. We have asked for all of this background in correspondence and just in the rationale for these changes and why they were accepted by the government. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, we've received back a large amount of paper that's been completely blanked out. There is nothing of value that we have received back. We have no clearer idea about why this agreement is any better than the previous agreement, why the government would have decided to back down on its very strong position with the federal government. And we are disappointed that the government has done so. And if, in fact, the agreement is better, then share with us the reasons, the rationale, the modeling, the economics behind it, and we will look at that. But in the absence of that, it's nothing but rhetoric and empty promises. And we believe that the original accord should have been honored from day one and should be honored today. Mr. Speaker, the health care crisis is another issue I want to touch on because my time is beginning to come to a close. Mr. Speaker, we've seen the emergency rooms in the province closed a record number of hours this year, 154 days actually in total if you add them all up. And that was in 2006. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. It's up to 262 days this year. It's a 60% increase that we've seen. So anyway, we're very concerned about that. The increase in healthcare spending from year to year is another concern, Mr. Speaker. We're up 6% from last year, and we have been increasing our healthcare budget beyond. Is there an introduction? Okay, thank you. Mr. Speaker, the budget of our health budget has gone up more each year for the last number of years than the growth in our economy, and we cannot continue to sustain that. This year, if you look at the healthcare budget, just in terms of program spending, we're now at 46% of the total budget. I find it interesting, Mr. Speaker, that we have 18 cabinet ministers, and yet one cabinet minister is responsible for almost 50% of the program spending. I think maybe there needs to be a realignment of priorities within the cabinet of this province, because we've got an awful lot of people dealing with much, much smaller amounts of the money that are allocated to this province, and maybe we need some way to acknowledge the importance of health care in the legislature and through our spending priorities. It's a huge department with a huge amount of spending. We have an aging population, and we know that the pressures on health are going to increase. And hopefully some of the changes that were recommended this year in the Corpus-Sanchez report will make a difference. And my only concern there is that so many of those recommendations have been discussed time and time again. Mr. Speaker, I believe you have an introduction.
That's correct. Thank you for... The Chair now recognizes the Honourable the Minister of Environment on introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to welcome students in the gallery opposite from Northeast Kings Education Centre with their teacher, Darlene Thomas. Darlene also taught all three of my children, although she doesn't look old enough to have done that. And seated beside Darlene is Leisha Benjamin, who single-handedly won Meadowview for me in 3 elections. And the students are here and have had a very good time. I should explain to the students that we're in a debate on the budget now. The budget was presented on Tuesday, and then the official opposition responded to it just recently, and now the finance critic for the Liberal Party, an honourable member, and her husband and I have been friends, is responding on behalf of the Liberal Party to what she likes and doesn't like in the budget. And so you've missed the excitement of question period, but you're here for some very substantive discussion. So if I could ask the members to join me in welcoming the students.
The honourable member from Halifax, Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. And I was discussing health care and the huge amount of spending that we have allocated towards it. That budget has risen, as I said, to absorb 46% of program spending for our entire province. It's a huge amount of money, and it is in fact something that has continued to grow in the many years that the Conservative government have been in power. When the Conservatives were first elected, the part of their platform in being elected was that they said they could cure the health care problems of this province for $46 million. Well, Mr. Speaker, this year, I believe that many members remember that election where that promise was made. This year alone, we've added $200 million to the budget in health care, and we know that the demands are still not met, that Nova Scotians still have long wait times for surgeries. It's still difficult to see specialists, and we have a lot of challenges in long-term care. So, Mr. Speaker, $200 million didn't begin to cut it, and I don't know where the promise of curing all the problems for $46 million ever came from. In the years from 1999 to this year, Mr. Speaker, the spending in health care is up $1.6 billion. That's more than we spend a year on our education, post-secondary and public education. So health is a huge concern to all of us, along with the aging population and the need for more services for seniors. Mr. Speaker, that brings me to one positive thing in the budget, and that was what I will call an expansion of the in-home support program. Mr. Speaker, this was a Liberal idea last year, that there should be support for people living in their own homes who are cared for by their family members or members who are close, friends and family close to them. That had not been allowed in the past, and this was started last year as a pilot project. It was very limited in its scope while it was being tested, and I believe it was limited to the County of Richmond. But that has been seen to be in a very effective way to help people. Most older people, when they become ill or infirm, want to stay in their own communities. They have friends and connections. They have long time just associations in that area and people that care about them, and they do not want to be moved to nursing homes or centers further away from where they live. In fact, in some cases, it's even more profound. For example, Mr. Speaker, in areas like Clare, where people are sometimes moved away, where they even are separated from their culture and language. And that's very profound when you find yourself elderly and living in an area where you're being cared for by people who don't speak your language. So we've been very well aware of that, and for a long time, our Liberal platform has stressed the need to help people stay in their own homes and be cared for in their own communities. And this in-home support program is one very sensible, common sense way to do that. And to see that expanded is something that we do applaud. And we'd like to see it become a well-established part of the healthcare options for seniors in this province. And I think from my own personal experience talking to seniors, many of them have asked why they can't have the same support living at home that they would get if they were sent somewhere else, and if somebody unknown to them was to care for them. It means a lot to them to have somebody who cares about them be there. So I really applaud that particular move. Also in the budget, Mr. Speaker, we've seen that the government is now willing to fund the drug Avastin, which is used for colorectal cancer. And I know that not very long ago, the government had listened to a panel and said no, they wouldn't do that. But I believe there have been very compelling arguments to move forward. Certainly our caucus has supported the change, believing that this is a drug that should be covered by the government formulary. In other provinces, close by Newfoundland and a few others, this drug had been covered. And people who suffer from colorectal cancer in Nova Scotia were not given the same opportunity for treatment. And as we know, there have been a number of people who have championed that cause, most notably Jim Connors of Dartmouth, who spoke to many members of the legislature. So we certainly applaud the fact that that has been changed to improve the quality of life for those cancer sufferers. Mr. Speaker, the long-term care program is very inadequate for the needs of this province. Although I applaud the idea of keeping more people in their own homes, there's more than 1,000 people on the waiting list today to get a long-term care bed, and they're simply not available, Mr. Speaker. The Deputy Minister of Health stated not long ago at a committee meeting that the beds that are promised were needed yesterday, not 3 years from now. And they have right now in place a 10-year plan, Mr. Speaker, to provide something in the range of 800 beds, I believe it is, 800. And yet, as I said earlier, there are 1,000 people on the waiting list today, and that number continues to grow. So the plan that's in place now, although we've seen some pictures of new places under construction, it's not going to be enough to address what's often being called now the gray tsunami that is coming at us as we go forward into this century. We have a lot of seniors in this. All right. So, Mr. Speaker, what we want to see are programs that help people stay in their own home and in their community. We think the plan is inadequate at the moment for the long-term care crisis that's facing us, and we'd like to see something done on that as well. Mr. Speaker, my time's getting short, and I wanted to speak on the energy rebate, which has caused a lot of confusion. 10 minutes may not be enough to go to that, but I've got to get there. Maybe I'll have more. Mr. Speaker, the energy rebate has been important to us from the start, and that energy rebate was originally called Keep the Heat and was intended for those in our midst who are in the lowest income brackets, who need financial assistance in the winter when it's cold and it costs so much to fill up your oil tank or to pay for electricity. And when the government, we believe it was misled or in a misguided means, canceled that program, we had been calling from the very onset that it be reestablished. But what we have in this budget, Mr. Speaker, is less than the original Keep the Heat program. It's going to provide $200 to people for oil heat. The previous program provided $250. Now, Mr. Speaker, the cost of oil has practically doubled from the time that original Keep the Heat program was put in place, so the amount they can buy is even less again. It's just not enough to be effective when you have the costs that we have. We have the oldest housing stock in the country, Mr. Speaker, because we're an older province. We'll have a lot of people living in old homes, and they weren't built with any insulation. They weren't built to keep the heat in. We burned wood and coal, and we had other sources of heat, and we weren't conscious of the impact on the environment or the cost of doing so, of burning those fuels. Well, today it's quite different, Mr. Speaker, and we need to find a way to help Nova Scotians get their homes updated so that they're no longer basically letting the heat go up the chimney. We have to find better ways to update and insulate and modernize those homes that they're living in today. And keep the heat is important, but it is a stopgap measure, because what we have to do is make sure that the money is going to be will actually go to the best use, and that means we need to have the homes better equipped to be energy efficient. But the Keep the Heat program certainly helped, and I don't think there's a member in this House that didn't have people call their constituency office looking for that assistance and needing to access it. And this year, when the government gave an HST cut of 8% to all Nova Scotians, rich and poor, all of us got the benefit. I enjoy it. We all do. But it wasn't being targeted to the people who need it the most. And when people called my constituency this year looking for the help, I had to tell them there is no low-income help. Call the Salvation Army. Call the St. Vincent de Paul Society. Basically, go to other charities and hope that they have some help for you. And that's not good enough in a province like ours, Mr. Speaker. I've said we've had an expanded capacity. We have more money to spend than we've ever had before in this province. We need to help those people who haven't got the money to heat their homes. So bringing back this program, it was the right thing to do, but you brought it back in a way that's less efficient than it was before. It's going to have less impact on the people who need it. And of the money that is being saved by changing the electricity HST rebate, they're saving, I think it's $28 million, but only 10 of it's being redirected to the poor, to people who need it the most. And I think that what we need to do is, if we were going to go through the confusion of changing your energy rebate, which was the cut in HST, the provincial portion of HST on home heating fuels, we should have done it right in the first place. And if the government never intended it to cover all of your electricity bill, it should have been brought in the beginning with a little more thought, a little more consideration, better attention to the detail in the beginning, because it was brought in as a blanket amount off your electricity bill, and now we're facing the trouble that this is going to now feel like additional burden to people who are going to lose that benefit. So people were given something with the one hand, and now a year later it's being taken from them. That's not the way to conduct good public policy, Mr. Speaker. This is important for the province. It should have been brought in the right way in the first place. So, we feel that there's been an unnecessary amount of confusion. I'd like to mention that the energy rebate should be adjusted, the energy rebate that's being clawed back should be adjusted to recognize people who live in apartments, because in my riding of Clayton Park alone, there are 8,500 apartment units, and those people will not be using the average household amount of electricity. It's based on homes, not apartments. So I'm saying that they are completely being left out of this picture in terms of the clawback. It's likely that all of their energy rebate clawback it will all be clawed back. It will be gone. So I think that there's been a lot of confusion. There was I don't like to say it was bungled, but I think it was poorly introduced, and now we're paying the price today. And the people who are in greatest need, who need a revamped and improved Keep the Heat program, are getting a lesser version of that program today. So I would like to see that rearranged as well. Gas regulation, Mr. Speaker, is of paramount importance to the Liberal Party, because we believe it was wrong from the get-go. We should never have gone there. It was a mistake to introduce it. It was brought in because of shallow political thinking and pressure from another party in the opposition, not this party. The Liberal Party recognized that it would cost over $1 million to administer, and the Gardner-Pinfold study, which was the very expensive study brought in by the, or commissioned by the government to look at gas regulation, estimates that it costs about $10 million a year to have gas regulation in this province. Now, the previous speaker, the finance critic for the NDP, mentioned that there were 3 reasons to have it. Transparency. Well, we don't have transparency, Mr. Speaker, because it's being applied weekly by a political person, by the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Service Nova Scotia. It is not administered by the Utility Review Board, which would be arm's length and more transparent. It is not protecting rural gas stations, because we have sat here in multiple times telling you which stations have closed around the province. They're closing in rural areas. They're still struggling. It has not saved their day. And the third reason to do it was stability. Mr. Speaker, stability has also not been provided. We're changing the price now every single week, 52 times a year. The year before this was brought in, we had 50 changes in a year. So we're now changing it more often than they changed when it was geared by the commercial sector. We need to scrap gas regulations in its entirety, Mr. Speaker. Will save Nova Scotians money, and it will actually restore the marketplace to give us the best price on any given day. Now, I think that's clear. Mr. Speaker, the motor fuel tax is the highest in the country, and we have stated publicly that it should come down. We believe that the government themselves raised it 2 cents only a few short years ago, and that it's made us not competitive with our nearest neighbours. We want to improve our competitiveness so that there will continue to be expansion in the economy, continue to be some prosperity in Nova Scotia, and we believe that this is one way to do it. It's not the long-term solution, Mr. Speaker, to revamping our economy, to becoming less dependent on imported oil, but we believe it's necessary as a competitive step now, just at this point in time, because the costs are so high and causing Nova Scotians so much pain at this point in time. So we believe that we have to follow the example of other provinces and keep those taxes lower. There's another thing that we're doing in this province that not every province does, and that is that we add motor fuel tax and then we add HST on that tax. It's a tax on a tax. And as the cost of gasoline has risen so greatly, the HST revenues have also risen. And the monies that we may have lost in that regard have now been restored in HST payments. So we don't believe the government are going to be short millions of dollars as a result of doing this. We believe if they'd done it when we first called for it, they'd still be ahead by millions of dollars. Mr. Speaker, the mass transit tax credit, we believe, will help people who are taking the bus to be more, to add an incentive to their behavior. A lot of what we need to do in the future years is change consumer behavior, and that's one part of it. So we're looking to see that, brought in. We're pleased to see that it's coming forward. We believe that those measures are important. Mr. Speaker, we do believe the government should do more to help the human resources in health care. We'd like to see an expanded number of seats at the medical school that are paid for by the province of Nova Scotia. But, Mr. Speaker, I know I have to wrap up now, so what I'd like to let the House know is that we will be talking to Nova Scotians. We will be speaking in our constituencies and to stakeholder groups, and we will be looking at this budget line by line and item by item through the many hours of estimates that are to come. And from that, we will then have a clearer understanding about the pros and cons of this year's budget. But I think today I've had an opportunity to highlight some of the areas that are of concern and some of the things that are we see as positive. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The estimates are referred to the Committee of the Whole House on Supply. The Honourable, the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and through you, I'd like to seek the unanimous consent of the House to go into the Committee of the Whole House on Supply.
Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Against? Motion carried. The Honourable, the Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I move that you do now leave the chair and the House resolve itself into the Committee of the Whole House on Supply and to Her Majesty.
The Honourable, the Member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to take a few moments of the House this afternoon to bring forth to the attention of members opposite and issue a few invitations to cabinet ministers. Because as the MLA from Timberley Prospect, I'm privileged to report to the House that the people who I'm privileged enough to serve have some concerns that they believe should be brought to the floor of this legislature. So for those cabinet ministers opposite, one in particular, I would like to issue an invitation to the Minister of Education. And I wish all the best to the Minister of Education, considering the situation in her family at this time. It's great to see her here in the House, and we wish her and her mom all the best. The Minister of Education is my first choice in more ways than one. If she could take the opportunity to come into Timberley and to come down to Prospect, I'll make sure that she gets to see a band program in action. And Mr. Speaker, I know there are parents who are very concerned, and they're very concerned lately, about the band programs in junior high schools in particular, when students are being forced to make an important decision on whether they'll take band as actually a course or will it just be an extracurricular activity. And I can take the Minister of Education to band programs in all the schools in my community, junior high, elementary, and of course the local high schools. Band is an important part of the school system, it's an important part of the curriculum, and it deserves the recognition which it must continue to receive. But for the Minister of Education's attention, I'm not going to take her to the new high school, and I know the member from Glace Bay is always intrigued with the fact of how you get new schools built in your community. Cooperating with that particular minister, cooperating with previous governments, allowing to make sure that the proper changes were made at the time when the old high school was transformed into a junior high school and the new high school has been built into my community, has been exceptionally well received. And I'm always quite amused at times when the member from Glace Bay continues to bring up the fact of politics and the building of schools. The new high school, which is built in the communities that serves Chester St. Margaret's and Timberley Prospect, was built on time, was built in the correct location because the government listened to the people and the concerns of the community, making sure that we could get a new school. But I'm asking the Minister of Education, when she has the time and opportunity, not to go to that new high school, but to go to Terrence Bay Elementary. Terrence Bay Elementary is a small rural school in a wonderful historic fishing village of Terrence Bay. It is the focal point of that community, Mr. Speaker. And I know based upon your experience, you understand how important schools are, schools that aren't necessarily the big schools, but schools that are the small schools are the focal point of the community. And while we're in Terrence Bay, it might be appropriate if the Minister of Tourism took the time, along with the Education Minister, to accept my invitation to go to Terrence Bay and to see the SS Atlantic Museum. And of course, it's always a great Sunday, the last Sunday in July, when he would have the opportunity as the Minister of Tourism to see the blessing of the fleet in the fishing village of Terrence Bay, an event that is continued to be important to my community, important for the people who prosper by working at sea, and of course recreationally in the boating industry. More importantly, I'd like to offer the opportunity, and I know the Minister of Transportation is attentive to the details and the requests that he receives from all of us, because he has a job where he's constantly being asked for one particular road after another road. And I know how favored it seems lately the members opposite are when it comes to pictures. So I'm going to table the pictures of a subdivision street, and I'd like to table them now. I would like to point out there's a for sale sign here in this picture. It would be a tough sell to sell any house on those streets. I'd like, however, to invite the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructural Renewal at any time to come to a homeowners association meeting in the community that I represent. Homeowners that are concerned about the fact of the taxes they pay based upon the assessment and the services that they receive. He can come to the Brookside Homeowners Association. He can come to the Prospect Peninsula Homeowners Association, the McDonald Lake Road Homeowners Association. He can come to the Halliburton Hills Homeowners Association. The concern that is always brought up is that in these new subdivisions, you're going from paved roads to gravel roads, or muddy roads, I should call them, back to paved roads. Now, the minister opposite is well aware of the fact, of course, that's because of amalgamation here in the HRM, but there has to be some continuity so that streets that are paved begin from the end of one subdivision to another subdivision. And the minister is aware of the names of some of these streets. He has responded to me in numerous times dutifully, and I appreciate his thoroughness. But it's very important that the people who live in these streets, on these streets, in various subdivisions, they feel that at least they're being listened to. And it's with honor that I always table a petition or two in this House when it comes to concerns about various streets. And I thank the minister for his patience when it comes to dealing with my continuous line of requests. I would also like to invite the Minister of Environment to the community that I'm fortunate enough to represent. Now, I'm not going to talk about the landfill site. It's supposed to be a state-of-the-art. It's out in the 103. There are some days it's not state-of-the-art, but at least it's being monitored. I'm not going to talk about New Era Farms. New Era Farms is supposed to be state-of-the-art, and let me tell you, when the wind's blowing some days, it's not state-of-the-art. I'd like to invite the Minister of the Environment to come to the historic village of Prospect, because there is an island off Prospect named Redmond's Island, and the minister is aware of this situation. Redmond's Island is one of those islands of coastal communities that has been purchased by a non-resident. And that particular gentleman is trying to make a request so that he will no longer have an island, he will have a peninsula to his private island. The concern from the community is that they have environmental concerns about this process. They have environmental concerns about Redmond's Island, and it would be appropriate if the Minister of the Environment take a ride in my truck. I'll provide the transportation. We will go see Redmond's Island in downtown Prospect. There will be no TV cameras, there will be no microphones. It will be an opportunity for that particular minister to see up front and personally the concerns that this community has about another piece of coastal community that has slipped from our control. And now the new owner of Redmond's Island wants to make these changes which will affect the local environment and the local culture in the historic community of Prospect. I would also like to invite the Minister of Natural Resources to come to visit in the community of Timberley Prospect. The Minister of Natural Resources is well aware of the volunteers in the community that I represent and the long service that they have provided to look at protecting lands that are surrounded by the number 103 and Route 333. This is a land that's surrounding the Bluff Trail, a land that is of real importance to the people in a growing community, a fast-growing suburban community that in the midst of it can have these natural trails. Actually, there is a herd, not that big these days, of Nova Scotian moose. Not the moose that are in Cape Breton these days. Those are not actually Nova Scotian, let alone Cape Breton moose. They've been brought to other parts from Canada to Cape Breton. They are, of course, a healthy stock in Cape Breton. But there is a mainland moose that is located 20 minutes down the road here on the 103, and that land must be protected. And there are volunteers that have been involved in this process have expressed some frustration with the amount of time that it takes to get this matter addressed. We are looking at the importance of having recreational land that close to the major capital city of this province. There are people like Wayne Rogers, Tom Musial, Beth McGee have put long hours into this process. And I think that the Minister of Natural Resources is obliged to sit down in our community, again, no TV cameras, no microphones, but to look very clearly at the issue of protecting this land so close to the capital city of Nova Scotia. Now, Mr. Speaker, there are various other cabinet ministers that I, of course, would love to take into my community. I can only visit with so many of them in so time. So I'm looking at the fact, particularly the Minister of Education, when she can fit it into her schedule, I would look forward to taking her to Terrence Bay. I asked the Minister of Tourism to join us at that time so he could get an appreciation of this wonderful community. The Minister of Natural Resources, the Minister of Environment, the Minister of Transportation, at your calling, I would welcome the opportunity to have you to come to the community that I'm so privileged to represent. I also, Mr. Speaker, would like to point out the fact that the Minister is responsible for volunteers in this province. It would be a wonderful opportunity if the Minister responsible for volunteerism took the time to come to Timberley Prospect to meet with many of these volunteers. The heart and soul of a community that is fast growing. And the problem, of course, comes down when you deal with volunteers, Mr. Speaker, you always forget one or two. I took the opportunity to write down a few of the names to make sure that I could highlight their contributions over the last year in the community that I represent. And as you probably are aware, and I know there's members opposite aware, particularly the member from Truro, Bible Hill, as he continuously talks about the Cobequid Cougars, there is a successful football program at Sir John A. Macdonald High School. The Sir John A. Macdonald Flames have a successful high school football program because of the minor football program that was developed under the name of the Timberley Titans. And last year at this time, I have the honor, as a member of the St. Margaret's Bay Lions Club, to present the Volunteer of the Year, the Citizen of the Year, to Joe Lauder and to Keith Skiffington, the two men, along with lots of other supporters, who began the minor football program in the communities that I represent. Sir John A. is meeting with success on the football field because of the hard work of volunteers like Joe Lauder and Keith Skiffington. Tuesday night of this week, I had the opportunity to visit one of my volunteer fire departments. And at that time, I had the wonderful opportunity to meet Ken Butler. Ken Butler has served in the Prospect Road Fire Department for 30 years, never missing a training night on Tuesday night. Volunteer firefighters, young men, young women were there that evening, and many of them, Mr. Speaker, were past students of mine, acknowledged Ken Butler's commitment to his community. 30 years of not missing meetings, not missing training nights. My hat goes off to a gentleman like Ken Butler because of his long-standing commitment to the community that he lives in. Mr. Speaker, I would be remiss if I did not mention the outstanding young woman that was recognized recently during Volunteer Week here in our province. Katie Brousseau is a young woman who attends Ridgecliffe Middle School. She was chosen as the Provincial Youth Volunteer, and she has been suitably recognized in this House. Katie is an example that I can assure you, Mr. Speaker, there are plenty of young people in our community, plenty of young people who are role models. You know, so often, Mr. Speaker, and you know this, of course, there are teenagers who do great things in our community. It's important that we recognize and thank them because it's the unfortunate headlines when we deal with teenagers who misbehave, who give young people today a bad name. Well, Katie Brousseau has given the teenagers in the community that I represent, the community of Timberley and Prospect, wonderful recognition, and I congratulate Katie and her mom and dad on the great recognition which she has received. I, of course, have to mention the most important volunteer who I'm sure is probably acknowledging the fact if he's watching today, because when it comes to Christmas daddies in the community that I represent, aside from the fact that I have to wear my favorite hockey sweater, the team that I'm not allowed to mention these days because of other reasons, I can't believe that I have to lose another bet when it comes to that hockey team. But it seems to me that it's appropriate again to recognize Harry Bury. Harry Bury is one of those great volunteers who regularly shows up in Christmas Daddies, presents his check of $3,000 or $4,000 each and every year, and he did it for many years. Now, Harry's health is failing a bit. He still helps me out when he's the local Santa Claus, and I'm sitting on that ladder. Can you believe it, Mr. Speaker? I sit on a ladder all day. I'm not allowed to speak, which is very difficult. And they keep me on the ladder by continuing to put money into the pot that's at the base of the ladder. Harry Bury, the Santa Claus on that day, actually Mr. Santa Claus, I know the young member from Sackville-Cobequid brought his children out to see the ladder sitting competition, which takes place just before Christmas Daddies. Mr. Bury has a full white beard, and it's his beard. And young Taylor, who is the member from Sackville-Cobequid's daughter, when she finally got to meet that Santa Claus, she tugged on Harry's beard and said, "This is the real deal, Dad. This is the real deal." The volunteers in my community make it a wonderful example for me to follow. It is a privilege to stand in this House to speak on their behalf. It's an opportunity for me to say to all members present, I hope we know how privileged we are to be in this House, to represent the people and their requests, and I thank you for your time today, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the honourable member from Cape Breton South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to join in the debate today prior to going into supply. And I, Mr. Speaker, will try not to trespass on the time of the House too long because I know that everybody's anxious to get at the estimates and no more so than the government House leader. So I will, I'm going to say a few remarks and about a subject that's very near and dear to me and a subject that I know that my colleagues in Cape Breton and and academics who are employed in the Cape Breton area will be very pleased at the events today. So, you know, Mr. Speaker, some days are better than others in this place, and this is a good day. It's a good day for Cape Breton, and it's a good day for Cape Breton University, and it's a good day for the students of Cape Breton University, the ones who are there now and the ones who will go there in the future. And before I say a few remarks about the university itself and the programs at that university, I want to congratulate the Minister of Education for listening to the people of Cape Breton, for listening to those at Cape Breton University who saw the need to have an identity in a postgraduate situation, and they now have that. The minister listened, and I appreciate that, and certainly want to pass along my congratulations to her. Also, Mr. Speaker, the struggle over the years, some people may not realize the struggle that Cape Breton University has had over the years in trying to establish an identity of a university on Cape Breton Island. And I go back to the early days of the struggle when the university was looking for an identity. It was attached to St. FX University at the time and was indeed St. FX University Sydney campus. And then, Mr. Speaker, little x, yes, and then, Mr. Speaker, it was Xavier College and Xavier Junior College, and then UCCB, and attempts were started to try and have the name college removed because it seemed to many in Cape Breton that if the word college was there, that certainly people would look twice about going to the university in Cape Breton because of the fact that it may not be perceived as a full-blown university. Well, finally, I think, Mr. Speaker, today the government realized, and the people of Cape Breton are happy about that we now have an identity as a full-blown university, one that I feel should be given equal billing with any other university in Nova Scotia. And the announcement by the minister today of 40 Bachelor of Education seats for Cape Breton University is a step in that direction. Is it enough? Today, it was a good announcement. We can build on that in the future. There is a tremendous need in Cape Breton for students to be able to get a postgraduate education. They can now get their BA at Cape Breton University. Now, 40 of them will be able to get a Bachelor of Education degree there. The significance of that, Mr. Speaker, is that those students will now be able to, the ones from Cape Breton who will be taking the course, will now be able to live at home and attend university, and thereby saving many dollars in student fees each year. As you know, Mr. Speaker, the cost of tuition is very high in Nova Scotia. So anything that we can do to enable young people from Cape Breton to attend university, get a BA and a postgraduate degree in Bachelor of Education at Cape Breton University is indeed welcome, Mr. Speaker. And the people who take advantage of that will be more than pleased that their sons and daughters can live at home and attend the university in Cape Breton and receive a degree. Proud to say, Mr. Speaker, the Liberal Party fought for this for the past year and a half, meeting with the university, meeting with Dr. Harker and his staff, meeting with the Cape Breton District School Board, and meeting with other concerned people in the area who were looking to the day that we finally achieved today when we would have that degree. So I want to congratulate all those who were involved in making this day a reality, particularly the Sydney Victoria School Board, Cape Breton Victoria School Board, I should say, and the people at Cape Breton University. Dr. Harker and his staff, I believe, have exhibited great patience. They have a university with an excellent staff, both in terms of their teaching staff at that university and the other people who work there as well. Dedicated staff that are committed to the ideals of higher education, committed to excellence, Mr. Speaker, committed to excellence. And today was a vindication of that when the government realized that yes, Cape Breton University can compete. Cape Breton University should take a place in academia, if you will, in Nova Scotia as an equal to the other universities in this province. And I think we've gone a long way in achieving that today. There's, you know, the significance of this event today is not lost on the people who will take advantage of it immediately, but the significance is going to be down the road when Cape Breton University can build on the announcement that was made today. And a good example, Mr. Speaker, is the other program at Cape Breton University that was just announced, and the expansion of the nursing program at Cape Breton University, which is enabling now more people to receive their RN or their degree in nursing, I should say, at Cape Breton University. As you know, there's a tremendous shortage of trained nurses, and that field is opening up tremendously. And to be able to now offer the course to an increasing number of students at Cape Breton University gives further credibility to that university and its goals and objectives. And its goals and objectives in the future are to provide a quality education for not only the young people from Cape Breton Island, but people from all over the world who attend Cape Breton University and are able to take advantage of the excellent programs that are being offered there. I wanted to take the opportunity this afternoon, Mr. Speaker, because it is an important day, and again, you know, the Minister of Education realized that, and the government, I believe, realizes that if there are programs available in various parts of Nova Scotia, those programs should also be available on Cape Breton Island. And I never thought in my younger days that I'd be standing here talking about Cape Breton University because of the struggle that seemed insurmountable at that time, that nobody seemed to be listening. But I've attended courses at Xavier College, I've attended courses at St. FX University Sydney campus, I've attended courses at Xavier Junior College, and at one point I didn't know where I was attending courses. I was attending courses downtown above a car dealership. I was down the north end in an old building that used to house some office space. I was attending in rented space on Charlotte Street, and the university was all over the place. Now it has a home, a campus that they can be proud of. It now has a postgraduate degree, the prestigious degree of Bachelor of Education, and it's a Bachelor of Education that will be awarded by Cape Breton University. Not a surrogate of some other university, or not something that can't be attributed to the excellence at Cape Breton University, because it will be. You know, and I'm pleased about that, and I immediately shook the minister's hand this morning when that announcement was made, because it is a step forward for Cape Breton University, a step in the right direction. And Mr. Speaker, we here that come to Halifax from Cape Breton are saying, we can go home and say to people that finally, you know, Cape Breton University is coming of age. It's rightfully, the name is rightfully displayed as Cape Breton University, not a college or anything else, but Cape Breton University, equal to the other great universities in this province, and that's all we had asked for. That's all we had asked for, and today